She put her arm around the royal king's Gaurd. Clara had always been fascinated by the idea of visiting places that carried history and tradition. Ever since she was a little girl, she had watched documentaries about royal ceremonies, parades, and the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. She could remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of her living room, eyes wide, imagining herself standing in front of the palace gates, watching the guards march in their bright red uniforms and tall, black bearskin hats. It was a dream that had stayed with her for years, a tiny, persistent sparkle in her imagination that refused to fade. Now, finally, at 24, she was in London, standing just a few blocks away from the palace itself, with the chilly December air brushing against her face and a soft sense of excitement humming in her chest. The streets leading up to Buckingham Palace were bustling with people from every corner of the world. Tourists carried cameras and maps, snapping photos of the surrounding architecture and chatting excitedly about the royal family. Street performers tried to entertain the crowd with music, juggling acts, and even miniature parades of their own, attempting to mimic the elegance of the guards. Clara moved slowly through the throngs, careful not to jostle anyone, feeling a mix of anticipation and awe building inside her. Every step she took brought her closer to the palace gates, and with each step, her heart seemed to beat a little faster. When she finally reached the front of the crowd, she paused. The palace loomed ahead like something out of a storybook, its stone walls glowing softly in the morning light. The gates were tall and ornate, and behind them a line of guards stood perfectly still, their eyes forward, shoulders squared, and faces expressionless. Clara could feel the contrast between the vibrant crowd around her and the absolute stillness of the guards, almost as if time moved differently for them. They were statues in motion, disciplined and formal, yet somehow human. She noticed how precise every movement was, how their boots clicked in rhythm on the stone path, and how even the smallest gesture, like a shift of a hand or a turn of the head, was done with absolute care. Clara found herself focusing on one guard in particular. He stood a little apart from the others, near the edge of the gates, his posture flawless and his gaze steady. She couldn't explain why, but something about him drew her attention. Maybe it was the way he seemed almost impossibly tall, or the way the sunlight glinted off the buttons on his uniform. Maybe it was the quietness he radiated in the middle of all the chaos. He wasn't moving, yet he didn't feel cold or distant. He felt real in a way that the other guards didn't seem to. Clara smiled to herself, feeling a strange mix of respect and curiosity. As she watched, the ceremony began. The guards marched in perfect synchronization, the sound of their boots echoing against the palace walls. The crowd clapped politely, and Clara joined in, though she felt her eyes returning to the guard who had captured her attention. She studied him closely, noticing the smallest details, the glint of his brass buttons, the crisp folds of his uniform, the way his gloves were so perfectly fitted that it seemed impossible for him to feel any discomfort at all. For a moment, she imagined what it must be like to stand there for hours, motionless and composed, while the world bustled around him. The thought made her heart ache a little with admiration. Clara had always been someone who felt deeply connected to small, human moments. She loved to watch people and imagine their stories, and standing here, in front of one of the most famous palaces in the world, she couldn't help but wonder about the life of this guard. Did he have dreams, fears, or moments of laughter? How did it feel to be a symbol of tradition and history, admired silently by strangers but never able to show the smallest hint of emotion while on duty? The questions filled her mind, each one more insistent than the last. She shifted slightly, craning her neck to get a better view. The crowd around her was noisy and lively, but her focus remained on the guard. Children in the front waved at the soldiers, and their parents tried to capture the moment on camera, but he didn't flinch. Not a single twitch of muscle, not a blink out of place. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Clara felt a strange sense of calm watching him, a contrast to the busy, bustling energy around her. The more she looked, the more she felt drawn to him, not in a romantic sense, but as though she wanted to understand him, to bridge the gap between the uniform and the human beneath it. The crowd began to cheer as the changing of the guard continued, and Clara found herself clapping along, though her mind was elsewhere. She imagined what it would be like to step closer, to somehow connect with this figure of discipline and tradition. A tiny, impulsive thought flickered in her mind. What if she reached out, just for a moment, to make a personal connection with someone who seemed so untouchable? The idea made her heart race. She knew it was risky, that there were rules and strict traditions she shouldn't break, yet the pull of the moment was irresistible. Clara's feet moved almost on their own. She edged closer to the guard, careful not to draw too much attention, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. The crowd seemed to part slightly as she maneuvered, as if the moment had a gravity all its own. She raised her hand tentatively, imagining what would happen if she reached out, and then, almost without thinking, she gently placed her arm around the guard's shoulder. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The crowd gasped softly, some people laughing nervously, others whispering in disbelief. Clara's heart pounded wildly in her chest, and she felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She had done something impulsive, bold, and a little bit reckless. Yet when she looked up at the guard, she was met with the same calm, steady gaze she had admired from the beginning. He didn't flinch, didn't step away, and didn't show a hint of irritation. Instead, he remained a pillar of composure, standing tall and silent, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Clara's initial shock slowly gave way to a strange sense of relief. She realized that the guard's unshakable composure had somehow protected the moment, made it feel safe even though she had broken the invisible rules. She felt a mix of awe and gratitude, as though she had been given a tiny glimpse into a world of discipline and patience that most people never saw up close. The experience was fleeting, but it left a lasting impression on her, a reminder that even in the most rigid structures, small human connections could exist, if only for a moment. The rest of the ceremony continued around her, the sounds of marching boots and brass instruments blending with the murmurs of the crowd. Clara let her arm drop slowly, stepping back to regain her place among the onlookers. She felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and humility. She hadn't caused any harm, yet she had touched something that felt profoundly significant. The guard's stoic presence had transformed what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a moment of connection and wonder. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara lingered, savoring the memory. She knew she would carry this experience with her for years, a small but unforgettable adventure in the heart of one of the world's most famous palaces. It wasn't just the thrill of breaking an unspoken rule, or the excitement of standing close to history. It was the feeling of being part of a story, even briefly, and of realizing that behind every tradition, every uniform, and every ceremony, there were real people with their own quiet strength and humanity. Clara finally turned to leave, her steps slow and thoughtful. She glanced back at the guard one last time, silently acknowledging him and the role he played in her unforgettable day. It was a small, private moment between two strangers, one impulsive, the other disciplined, that neither would ever forget. And for Clara, it marked the beginning of a story she would share many times, always with a smile, always with the same mix of awe and wonder she had felt that crisp morning at Buckingham Palace. Clara's heart was still racing from the bold move she had made, her arm gently resting on the guard's shoulder, when she realized she was suddenly the center of attention. The crowd around her had gone quiet for a moment, then murmurs began to ripple through the onlookers. People whispered to each other, some pointing at her with wide eyes, others pulling out their phones to take pictures or record videos. Clara could feel a mix of thrill and panic coursing through her body. Her mind was spinning, thinking, did I just do something I should? Is someone going to yell at me? Will security come? Almost immediately, Clara noticed movement at the edges of the crowd. Two uniformed officers were making their way quickly toward her, their expressions serious but not angry. Their steps were deliberate, confident, and unhurried, but to Clara, they seemed to be coming at the speed of light. Her chest tightened. She had expected to feel embarrassment or maybe even fear, but what hit her first was the awareness that she had broken the invisible rules surrounding the guards. Here she was, a tourist who had acted on impulse, standing too close to a symbol of centuries of tradition. The guard remained perfectly still, unmoving, as if he had been trained to remain unaffected by every possible distraction in the world. Clara couldn't help but stare at him for a moment, marveling at his discipline. The way he stood, the straightness of his back, the calmness in his eyes, it was almost hypnotic. For a second, she imagined what it would feel like to be him, to stand in one place for hours, maintaining absolute composure while hundreds of people tried to engage, tease, or even photograph you. She couldn't imagine it. It seemed impossible, and yet here he was, doing it flawlessly. The officers reached Clara and spoke in polite but firm tones. "Ma'am, please step aside," one of them said. Clara's voice caught in her throat for a moment, but she nodded quickly, moving a few steps away from the guard. Her cheeks burned with heat, partly from the cold air and partly from embarrassment. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd growing louder, a mixture of amusement, shock, and admiration. Children were pointing and whispering to their parents, and even the adults around her seemed captivated by the situation. Clara could feel every eye in the area on her, and it made her pulse quicken. As she stood there, the officers gently explained that it was important not to touch or distract the guards while they were on duty. They spoke with courtesy, but their message was clear. The guards had an important responsibility, and even small disruptions could be considered serious. Clara listened carefully, nodding and understanding, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. She realized that while her action had been impulsive, it hadn't caused harm or disrespect, and the guard's steady presence had made all the difference. Clara's mind raced as she processed the situation. She felt a strange combination of pride and humility. Pride because she had done something bold and human in the middle of a formal, rigid environment. Humility because she had seen firsthand the level of discipline required to perform the guard's duty. She realized that the guards were more than just symbols of history. They were individuals with incredible self-control, dedication, and patience. This thought made her feel both small and inspired at the same time. As the officers guided her a few steps to the side, Clara couldn't resist glancing back at the guard. He remained perfectly still, almost statuesque, and yet there was a sense of quiet understanding in his posture. Clara imagined that somewhere deep inside, he must have noticed the human connection, the fleeting gesture that had broken the barrier between ceremonial duty and personal expression. It was as if, without saying a word, the guard had acknowledged her presence and her curiosity, and that small recognition filled Clara with a sense of wonder. The crowd began to move on, continuing to watch the ceremony and snapping photos of the marching guards. Clara, however, felt rooted to the spot. She was no longer just a tourist observing history. She had become a part of it, even if only for a brief, imperceptible moment. She thought about how quickly life could present unexpected opportunities, moments that seemed ordinary on the surface, but carried extraordinary significance when approached with courage and curiosity. For a few minutes, Clara simply watched the guard, taking in every detail. She noticed the way his hat seemed impossibly tall, how his gloves were fitted perfectly, and how he carried himself with an elegance that seemed effortless. Every movement, no matter how small, was precise and controlled. She realized that this was not just a performance, it was a form of art, a silent discipline that demanded respect and admiration. Clara felt honored to witness it so closely, to see the human effort behind the iconic uniform. Her thoughts were interrupted by a small group of children who had approached, fascinated by the scene. They asked their parents questions about the guard, and their parents tried to explain the ceremony and the importance of tradition. Clara smiled to herself, watching the curiosity in their eyes. She remembered being that curious child herself, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, imagining this very moment. It struck her that history, tradition, and human connection could all meet in one place, in one shared experience that crossed generations and cultures. After a while, the officers returned to their posts, watching the crowd with vigilant eyes. Clara took a deep breath and reminded herself to step back, to respect the guard's space while still appreciating the experience. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, a quiet satisfaction that came from having acted on impulse but done so without causing harm. The memory of the brief connection lingered in her mind, like a tiny spark of warmth in the cold morning air. Clara began to explore the area around the palace, her steps lighter and more joyful than before. Every corner seemed filled with history, from the ornate gates to the intricate stonework of the building itself. Street vendors sold souvenirs, postcards, and small trinkets, but Clara found herself drawn less to the objects and more to the stories they represented. She thought about the countless people who had visited this place over centuries, each experiencing their own fleeting moments of connection with history and tradition. And now, she realized, she had created her own story, one that would stay with her for a lifetime. Even as she walked, Clara's mind kept returning to the guard. She imagined what his day might be like, standing perfectly still for hours, maintaining composure and observing the world silently. She wondered if he noticed the small gestures of humanity that came his way, like hers, and how he must balance personal feelings with the responsibility of his role. It fascinated her, this combination of discipline and humanity, and she found herself silently admiring him even more. By the time Clara decided to leave the palace grounds, she felt as if she had been part of something much larger than herself. The experience had been thrilling, nerve-wracking, and inspiring all at once. She understood, in a way she hadn't before, the delicate balance between tradition and spontaneity, between rules and human connection. The brief moment of courage she had shown, placing her arm around the guard, had opened her eyes to the beauty of small, meaningful interactions that could happen even in the most formal and structured environments. As she walked away, Clara smiled, knowing she would carry this memory with her forever. It was a story she would tell again and again, not just for the thrill of having bent the rules slightly, but for the lesson it had taught her about courage, respect, and the human capacity to connect across boundaries. And in her heart, she silently thanked the guard, whose quiet strength and composure had made the moment unforgettable, a story she would treasure for the rest of her life. Clara's pulse was still racing, but now it carried a slightly different rhythm. She had stepped back from the guard after placing her arm on his shoulder, and while the initial thrill had faded into awe and wonder, a new feeling had begun to settle over her, nervous anticipation. She could see the officers nearby, their expressions serious, scanning the crowd and occasionally glancing her way. She knew they had noticed what she had done, and while she hadn't meant any harm, she could not ignore the possibility that her impulsive action might have consequences. The palace gates and the surrounding courtyard were crowded with tourists, photographers, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness a piece of history in action. Cameras flashed constantly, capturing images of guards in their red uniforms and bearskin hats, perfectly poised and disciplined. Children pressed against their parents to get a better view, their eyes wide with excitement. Street performers tried to entertain the crowd with playful antics, and the hum of voices, laughter, and snapping cameras created a lively, almost chaotic atmosphere. Amid all this, Clara felt both conspicuous and strangely part of something much larger than herself. As she moved a few steps aside, one of the officers approached more closely, a polite but firm look on his face. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "please wait here for a moment." Clara's stomach knotted. She nodded, unsure whether to apologize, explain, or simply stand silently. The officer's tone was professional, not angry, but there was no mistaking the authority in his voice. Clara realized she was about to experience the formal side of royal protocol up close, and a mix of curiosity and apprehension filled her. The officer gently guided her to a quieter spot near the edge of the courtyard, away from the central crowd. He explained that the guards were performing a ceremonial duty that demanded complete attention and focus. Even small disruptions could interfere with their responsibilities or distract them from their post. Clara listened carefully, her mind racing as she tried to understand the balance between discipline and human curiosity. She knew she had acted on impulse, but she also felt a strange pride. She had created a unique, personal connection, however fleeting, with someone who represented centuries of tradition. While Clara waited, she kept glancing back at the guard. He remained perfectly still, his gaze unwavering, and yet there was a calm dignity in his posture that seemed almost comforting. Watching him, Clara felt a wave of admiration for his patience and composure. It was clear that maintaining such discipline required more than training. It required an inner strength, focus, and an understanding of one's role in the bigger picture. She imagined what it must be like to carry that responsibility every day, to stand as a symbol of history and tradition, while still being human underneath the uniform. The crowd continued to buzz around her. Tourists whispered excitedly about what had just happened, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Clara overheard snippets of conversations. "Did she really do that? I can't believe the guard didn't move. That's so bold." She realized that her impulsive action had created a story for everyone around her, a small moment of unexpected excitement in a place that was otherwise governed by strict rules and routine. It made her feel both self-conscious and exhilarated at the same time. Suddenly, the guard shifted slightly, adjusting his stance in a precise, almost imperceptible motion. Clara noticed it immediately. Even in that tiny adjustment, there was a sense of discipline and control that fascinated her. He was aware of his surroundings, of course, but he did not allow anything, not her, not the crowd, not the flashes of cameras, to disturb his composure. Clara felt a mixture of awe and humility. She understood in that moment that discipline was not just about standing still. It was about mastering oneself in the midst of chaos. The officers returned briefly, checking on the crowd and giving gentle reminders to keep a respectful distance from the guards. Clara realized that their role was not just enforcement, but also protection, protecting both the guards and the ceremonial tradition. She appreciated their professionalism and restraint. They could have been harsh or stern, but instead, they approached the situation with calm authority. Clara felt a renewed respect for the system, recognizing how much care and attention went into maintaining the dignity of such historic ceremonies. Despite the nerves, Clara's curiosity was far from satisfied. She watched the guard closely, noticing the subtle ways in which he adjusted his uniform, the way his gloves fit perfectly, and the controlled rhythm of his breathing. Every detail fascinated her. She imagined that while the uniform was imposing, it was also heavy, restrictive, and demanding. The bare hat alone seemed almost impossible to wear for long periods, yet he carried himself with ease. It was clear that every part of his appearance, every movement, had been practiced countless times to perfection. Clara's mind wandered to thoughts about courage. She thought about the courage it took for the guard to remain completely still, aware of hundreds of eyes on him, yet never losing composure. And she thought about her own small act of courage, the moment she had placed her arm around him, stepping slightly outside the norms of behavior. She realized that courage came in many forms, some quiet, some bold, some fleeting, and some disciplined. Both she and the guard had demonstrated it in different ways, and somehow in that brief interaction their small acts of bravery had intersected. Minutes passed, yet it felt much longer to Clara. She could feel the tension in her body slowly easing as she absorbed the scene around her. The crowd's chatter had returned to its usual hum, and the officers seemed satisfied that the situation was under control. Clara took a deep breath, realizing that the adrenaline had begun to fade, leaving behind a warm sense of wonder and appreciation. She felt a connection not just to the guard, but to the larger story unfolding around her. A story of tradition, discipline, and human curiosity meeting in one unforgettable moment. Clara's attention was drawn to the children nearby, still pointing and whispering excitedly about the guards. Their innocent fascination reminded her of the way she had felt as a child, sitting in her living room, dreaming of this very experience. She realized that moments like this, seemingly ordinary yet extraordinary, were what made life memorable. They were the small sparks that brought joy, awe, and learning into everyday experiences, leaving an imprint that could last a lifetime. As she reflected, Clara noticed the guard make another tiny movement, shifting slightly to adjust his stance. It was such a subtle motion that few others would have noticed, but Clara saw it immediately. In that movement, she recognized something almost human, the need to remain comfortable even within the strict confines of duty. It reminded her that beneath every uniform, every ritual, and every tradition there was a real person, experiencing the world in their own way, balancing responsibility with humanity. Clara took another deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill her lungs. She understood that she had witnessed more than a ceremony. She had witnessed a lesson in patience, dedication, and the quiet power of composure. The guard had remained unwavering, unaffected by her impulsive gesture and the attention of hundreds of onlookers. Yet through his quiet presence, he had communicated a message of resilience and dignity that spoke to her deeply. When the officers returned one last time to check on her, Clara smiled politely, thanking them for their guidance. They nodded in acknowledgement, their professionalism evident, and then returned to their posts. Clara realized that this brief encounter had been managed with care and respect on all sides, by the guard, the officers, and even by the crowd, whose curiosity had been tempered by admiration. It was a moment of shared humanity within the strict confines of tradition, and Clara felt grateful to have experienced it firsthand. Finally, The ceremony began to wind down, with the guards marching back to their posts and the crowd slowly dispersing. Clara took one last look at the guard who had captured her attention. He remained perfectly still, his composure unwavering, yet there was a quiet presence about him that lingered in her mind. She knew that even after she left the palace, this memory would remain with her, a vivid reminder of discipline, courage, and the small ways humans can connect, even across barriers of tradition and ceremony. As Clara began to walk away, her steps felt lighter, her mind buzzing with excitement and reflection. She knew she had participated in something memorable, even if it was a fleeting moment. She had stepped outside her comfort zone, acted impulsively but respectfully, and in return had been rewarded with an experience that was both thrilling and profoundly human. It was a story she would tell countless times, not just for the thrill of daring action, but for the lesson it carried about courage, respect, and the beauty of small, meaningful connections. And as she left the palace grounds, Clara couldn't help but glance back once more, silently thanking the guard for his calmness, his dignity, and for the unforgettable lesson in human connection that had transformed an ordinary visit into an extraordinary memory. After leaving palace grounds, Clara walked slowly through the streets of London, her mind buzzing with thoughts about everything she had just experienced. The city was alive with the sounds of morning traffic, distant chatter, and the occasional ringing of bicycle bells. Yet despite the lively atmosphere, Clara felt as if she were moving through a world slightly apart from everyone else, a world that contained the memory of the morning, the brief but unforgettable encounter with the royal guard, and the feelings it had stirred in her. Each step seemed to echo the lessons she had absorbed, though she wasn't yet able to put them into words. Clara found herself wandering down quieter streets, away from the throngs of tourists who still lingered near Buckingham Palace. She passed small cafes with windows fogged from the warmth inside, and street vendors arranging colorful displays of postcards and souvenirs. She barely noticed them. Her attention kept returning to the image of the guard, standing perfectly still, so disciplined and composed, yet in a way that felt deeply human. She wondered how many people had rushed past him that morning, only seeing the uniform, the bearskin hat, and the rigid posture, without ever considering the person beneath. She felt a unique sense of gratitude for having noticed. As Clara walked, she replayed the events in her mind. She remembered the moment she had stepped closer, the impulsive decision to put her arm around his shoulder, and the immediate mix of panic and exhilaration that had followed. At first, she had been nervous about the reaction of the crowd and the officers. She had braced herself for scolding or embarrassment, but none came. Instead, she had been met with calm authority and quiet understanding. And the guard, his steady presence had turned what could have been an uncomfortable or awkward situation into a moment of wonder, a memory she would treasure. Clara found herself thinking deeply about courage and composure. She realized that the guard's strength did not lie merely in his ability to stand still. It lay in his patience, his discipline, and his capacity to remain calm even when distractions surrounded him. Clara had acted impulsively, guided by excitement and curiosity, but the guard had acted with purpose and restraint. The contrast fascinated her. She thought about how these two very different approaches, boldness and patience, had met so briefly and left such a lasting impact. It was a reminder that courage and strength came in many forms, sometimes outward and dramatic, sometimes quiet and internal. She paused at a small park bench and sat down, letting her thoughts settle around her like the cool morning air. She pictured the guard once more, standing there among the ceremonial formations, a human figure embodying centuries of tradition. The more she thought about it, the more she appreciated the patience it must take to perform such duties day after day. She imagined his mornings starting long before the city awoke, the precision required to maintain every detail of his appearance and posture, and the discipline it took to stand as a symbol of history while hundreds of people observed him. It was exhausting just to think about it, yet he had made it look effortless. Clara realized that her experience had given her more than just an exciting story to tell. It had given her a new perspective on human connection and respect. Even within strict rules and formal traditions, there was room for small, meaningful interactions, gestures that might seem minor but could carry deep significance. The simple act of placing her arm on the guard's shoulder had been a fleeting connection, but it had reminded her that human curiosity and courage could coexist with respect for boundaries. It was a lesson she wanted to carry forward in her own life. She reflected on the crowd around the palace, the other tourists who had witnessed the scene. Many of them had probably seen her action and thought it daring or cheeky, but Clara understood it differently. It was not about showing off or breaking rules for fun. It was about curiosity, about reaching toward something that seemed untouchable, about bridging the gap between human beings even when social norms stood in the way. She smiled at the thought. Sometimes the most meaningful moments in life were the ones that happened quietly, in the spaces between rules and traditions. Clara thought about the officers who had approached her, guiding her gently but firmly to the side. She admired their professionalism. They could have been stern or strict, but instead, they handled the situation with patience and respect. It reminded her that authority and kindness could exist together, and that discipline did not have to mean harshness. She felt grateful for their understanding and the balance they had maintained between duty and humanity. As she continued walking, Clara reflected on her own impulsiveness. She had acted on a whim, driven by excitement and curiosity, and it had led her to a remarkable experience. She realized that sometimes it was necessary to take small risks to discover new perspectives, to encounter moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Her small act had been harmless, but it had opened a door to a story she would never forget. The guard's calm and composed response had amplified that moment, turning it from something potentially embarrassing into something inspiring. Clara's thoughts turned to the idea of memory. She understood that some moments linger not because of their size or drama, but because of the emotions they carry. The morning at Buckingham Palace had been a quiet adventure, a small story of curiosity, courage, and human connection. It would stay with her, she realized, not because it was extraordinary in the world's eyes, but because it had felt extraordinary to her. It had been intimate, fleeting, and profound. She pictured herself telling the story to friends and family someday. She imagined their reactions, surprise, laughter, perhaps disbelief, and she smiled. She knew that the essence of the story would not be the act itself, but the emotions and lessons it carried. The guard's unwavering discipline, the officer's professionalism, the crowd's reactions, and her own feelings of excitement and reflection. All of it combined to create something more meaningful than a simple anecdote. Clara also thought about the people she had seen observing the guards. She realized that many of them might never truly notice the human effort behind the uniforms, the dedication it took to perform such a duty with dignity. She felt lucky, almost privileged, to have witnessed it in a way that was personal and memorable. It reminded her that paying attention, noticing details, and appreciating human effort could transform ordinary experiences into extraordinary memories. As the morning wore on, Clara found herself feeling a gentle sense of peace. The rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a warm, reflective feeling. She felt connected to the city, to history, and in a small way to the royal guard himself. She understood that while the moment was brief, its significance was lasting. It had shown her that even in environments governed by rules, formality, and tradition, there was room for personal connection, curiosity, and courage. Clara paused at a small bridge overlooking the Thames, watching the water ripple in the morning sun. She reflected on the idea that life was full of such moments, small opportunities to connect, to step beyond comfort zones, to learn and grow. The guard had reminded her that discipline and patience were powerful forms of courage, and her own small act had reminded her that human curiosity and spontaneity could also create meaningful experiences. Together, they had created a memory that was more than the sum of its parts. As she sat there, Clara resolved to carry this lesson forward. She would seek out moments of connection, pay attention to the effort and humanity behind appearances, and allow herself to take small risks in pursuit of understanding and curiosity. She realized that the true value of experiences was not always in their scale or drama, but in the emotions they stirred and the reflections they inspired. By the time Clara began to head back toward the more crowded parts of the city, she felt lighter, calmer, and more thoughtful. She understood that the morning's adventure was not just a story to tell, but a lesson in life, a reminder that curiosity, respect, courage, and reflection could coexist in the most unexpected places. She knew she would never forget the guard, the officers, or the subtle magic of that moment when human spontaneity met centuries of tradition. Clara walked through the streets with a smile, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. She had come to Buckingham Palace seeking history and spectacle, but she had discovered something far deeper. A reminder that life was full of small, meaningful moments that could leave lasting impressions, if only one was willing to notice them. That morning had become more than a tourist experience. It had become a memory, a lesson, and a story she would carry with her forever. Clara continued walking through the streets of London, the morning sunlight glinting off the windows of the historic buildings around her. She felt a lightness in her steps, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with the sights or the crowds. Instead, it came from the memory of the royal guard, the brief and impulsive moment when she had placed her arm around his shoulder, and the ripple of reactions it had caused. That single act, small and fleeting as it was, had transformed her ordinary visit into something extraordinary, something she would carry with her forever. As she moved through the bustling city streets, Clara reflected on how her experience had affected her perspective. She had arrived at Buckingham Palace seeking history and spectacle, hoping to witness tradition and ceremony. But what she had found was something far more personal and human. It was a reminder that behind every uniform, behind every ritual, there were real people, carrying out their duties with patience, discipline, and quiet strength. She realized that these individuals were often unseen and unappreciated, yet their presence created stability, beauty, and a sense of continuity that reached far beyond the palace gates. Clara's thoughts drifted back to the crowd that had gathered that morning. She remembered the mixture of surprise, amusement, and curiosity that had passed over the faces of those who had witnessed her small gesture. Children had pointed and whispered excitedly to their parents, tourists had taken photos, and even some passers-by had laughed softly in disbelief. At the time, she had felt self-conscious, worried that her impulsive action might have drawn disapproval. But now, reflecting on it, she realized that it had also inspired a shared sense of wonder. In that brief instant, she had connected with not just the guard, but with everyone who had witnessed the moment. It was a reminder that human interactions, even small and unexpected ones, could resonate in ways far beyond what one might expect. She found a quiet corner of a small park, the sounds of the city softened by distance, and sat down on a bench. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of baked goods from nearby cafes and the subtle freshness of the Thames River nearby. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting her mind replay the events in vivid detail. She could see the guard standing perfectly still, his uniform impeccable, his gaze forward and unwavering. She could feel, once again, the gentle warmth of her own impulsive gesture and the strange calm that had radiated from him in response. It had been a small moment, yet it carried a significance that went far beyond its simplicity. Clara reflected on what she had learned about courage that day. She realized that courage was not always about grand, heroic actions. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and personal. The guard had demonstrated courage through his discipline and unwavering composure. He had remained steady in the face of distraction, maintaining a presence that was both impressive and inspiring. Clara herself had demonstrated a different kind of courage, the courage to step forward, to act on impulse, and to connect with another human being in a moment that might have been risky. Together, these two forms of bravery had created a unique and unforgettable encounter. Her thoughts then turned to the idea of respect. Clara understood that respect was not just about following rules, but about recognizing the humanity in others, even when those humans were hidden beneath layers of tradition or ceremony. By observing the guard closely, she had learned to appreciate the discipline and effort behind the uniform. By taking a small risk to reach out, she had honored that humanity in a personal way. And by reflecting on the moment afterward, she had deepened her understanding of how meaningful it could be to notice, acknowledge, and value the people who surround us in our daily lives. Clara could not help but smile as she thought about the story she would tell in the future. She imagined recounting it to friends and family, describing the palace, the crowd, the ceremonial guards, and that one unforgettable moment when she had acted on impulse, and felt a quiet connection with someone she might never meet again. She imagined their reactions, surprise, laughter, curiosity, and she felt a warm sense of joy at the thought of sharing the experience. She knew that the value of the story would not lie solely in the action itself, but in the emotions, reflections, and insights it carried. The more Clara thought about it, the more she realized that moments like this were what made life memorable. They were not always dramatic or large-scale events. Often they were small, fleeting, and quiet, yet they left an impression that could last a lifetime. They were the sparks that lit our curiosity, that inspired reflection, that taught lessons about courage, patience, and respect. The morning at Buckingham Palace had been exactly such a moment, small in duration, but immense in personal significance. She took out her camera and looked at the photos she had taken earlier, but none of them captured the essence of the experience. The images showed the guards standing at attention, the crowd gathered around the gates, and the bright red uniforms and black bearskin hats. Yet Clara realized that the true memory could not be captured in photographs. It lived in her mind and heart, in the adrenaline of the moment, the admiration she felt, the quiet recognition of human discipline, and the exhilaration of a small but bold connection. This was something she would carry forever, a memory that could not be erased or diminished. Clara also reflected on the fleeting nature of time. That morning, the moment she had reached out to the guard lasted only seconds, yet its impact stretched far beyond those seconds. She realized that life was full of such moments, brief, seemingly insignificant interactions that could change the way we viewed the world, ourselves, and others. It was a reminder to pay attention, to embrace curiosity, and to allow oneself to participate fully in the experiences life offered, no matter how small or unusual they might seem. As she rose from the bench and continued her walk through the city, Clara felt a renewed sense of connection to the world around her. She noticed the details she had overlooked before, the intricate architecture of the buildings, the laughter of children playing, the rhythm of footsteps on the cobblestone streets. Everything felt more vivid, more alive, as if the morning's experience had opened her eyes to the beauty and significance of small moments. She realized that life's meaning often lay not in grand gestures, but in attention, reflection, and the courage to engage with the world around us. Clara thought about the guard once more, imagining him continuing his duty with the same calm, unwavering presence she had witnessed. She knew she might never see him again, yet the memory of his discipline and humanity would stay with her. She understood that part of the beauty of such encounters was their impermanence. The fleeting nature of the moment made it more precious, more vivid, and more meaningful. It was a reminder that even brief experiences could teach lasting lessons about courage, respect, and human connection. By the time Clara returned to her hotel, the day was fully underway. Tourists still crowded the streets, the city bustling with energy, yet she felt a quiet inner calm. She carried with her a memory that was alive, vibrant, and deeply personal. The morning had been more than a visit to Buckingham Palace. It had been a lesson in observation, a reflection on courage and discipline, and a celebration of human connection. She realized that the story she had created for herself that day would continue to grow and evolve in her mind, inspiring reflection and appreciation for years to come. Clara sat by the window in her hotel room, looking out over the city, and allowed herself to replay the morning one last time. She could still feel the warmth of the impulse that had led her to place her arm around the guard, the excitement and nervousness that had followed, and the quiet calm of the guard himself. She realized that the memory was more than just a story. It was a reflection of her own curiosity, courage, and appreciation for human dignity. It was a reminder that life could be both structured and spontaneous, formal and personal, disciplined and playful. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Clara smiled to herself. She understood that the morning at Buckingham Palace had given her more than a story to tell. It had given her insight into life itself. Discipline and courage, observation and reflection, spontaneity and respect. All of these elements had come together in a small, fleeting encounter that left a lasting impression. She knew that she would carry this lesson with her wherever she went, a quiet but profound reminder of the beauty and significance of human connection. Finally, Clara picked up her journal and began to write, capturing her thoughts, feelings, and reflections in words. She described the palace, the guards, the crowd, and her impulsive gesture. But more importantly, she described the lessons she had learned. The courage in discipline, the courage in spontaneity, the power of observation, and the beauty of small human connections. She wrote with a sense of gratitude and joy, knowing that the memory she was capturing would continue to inspire her long after she returned home. And as she finished writing, Clara leaned back and smiled. She realized that the morning had been a story of balance between duty and humanity, tradition and curiosity, formality and spontaneity. It was a story that would stay with her forever, a memory that would continue to inspire her to observe, connect, and act with courage and respect in all aspects of her life. She had gone to Buckingham Palace seeking history and ceremony, but she had returned with something far more valuable, a story of human connection, courage, and reflection that would live in her heart for a lifetime.